Okay, it's official. We're back. We're back, and we're gonna look at the skeletal system some more. Finally, it seems like forever since we covered the axial skeleton, and that was so intense.
A lot.
It was a lot. It is a lot. It's
Are those crickets in the background?
Yes, we've got, here, I'll give you a little tour, even though we're recording. Today's lecture will begin with a tour of my invertebrate collection, a tarantula collection. So he started collecting tarantulas, I don't know, like a year or two ago. And now he's got this sweet collection of all kinds of cool bugs.
That is so crazy.
That's awesome.
So I'm like,
Oh, cool.
down. But it does mean that we have to keep crickets. You can see this girl kind of. Can you see her? Right there. And oh, this guy's saying hello. Hi, buddy.
How cute.
He's got tarantulas and scorpions, and then crickets for them to eat. So they do make a bit of noise. Sorry about that. Hopefully I don't drive you crazy.
I was just a little alarmed because I was like, I know I haven't heard crickets in the background before. What is that?
What is happening? Well, I hope nobody is like got like a crazy like peeve about cricket sounds. Luckily we don't, because they're always escaping. So we have crickets all over the house.
Oh my god.
The cats love them. So it is what it is. We've got a kind of weird ecosystem happening in our house.
So I have a question, Ashley, before we start.
Let's do it.
We're in chapter 8, but we're in lab.
We are doing, so chapter 8 is Appendicular Skeleton, which corresponds to labs 14 through 16. So yeah, so the axial skeleton is labs 11, 12, and 13. And the appendicular skeleton is labs 14, 15, and 16. And I'm sure you noticed on Canvas under the assignment for what was lab 14, I bunched 15 in there with it. So it's lab 14 and 15. And it's worth a combined 8 points. So 14 and 15 are together because they use the same image for both. So basically 14 is supposed to be it's so dumb. Lab 14 is the scapula and the humerus, which is the shoulder and the upper arm. And then lab 15 is the lower arm and hand, which is silly. I feel like it should all be, you know, the pectoral girdle and the arm, because lab 16 is the pelvic girdle and the leg. So whatever, 14 and 15 go together. And I made them worth the same amount of points, so nothing has changed except the assignment is called lab 14 and 15, and it's worth 8 points.
Okay.
Them being 4 points individually.
So I wanted to just, because I was kind of confused in the lab part. Mm-hmm. And did you get a chance to see like what are we matching between the coloring book and our lab, and see like, hey.
So today's lecture, we're going to cover the entire appendicular skeleton, and since we're kind of doing lectures and labs at the same time, we're going to, I also have my coloring book, so I'm going to be looking at the pages here that I assigned, so that you guys can get an idea of what to look for. And let's see, what else? Oh, and the lab manual, of course, is going to be our reference for which markings you're going to be looking for, because the actual, unlike the skull, in which all those markings and fossae and protuberances and weird things seem like they're emphasized in the lab as well. I mean, in the coloring book, emphasized, or all the different bones are anyway. Bone markings are not emphasized so much. Oh, they are. They're totally there. So all the bone markings for the appendicular skeleton are also going to be a thing. And we're going to talk about each one of them today. And let's see, what did I assign for, so lab 14 and 15 should be pages 36, 37, and 40 and 41, I think. I'll have to double check that I did that.
So no more lab book. We're just following the lab stuff in the coloring book now, right?
The coloring book is going to be what we're using to actually turn in for the lab. But
Gotcha.
I'm basing the markings and the bones that I want you to know on the original lab manual.
Okay.
Actually, because like what I did for the labs was whatever how can I say, whatever terms are in the lab manual, I was trying to find in the coloring book. So I didn't label the key of the coloring book, but only the words in the lab manual. Was that okay?
That's perfect. They should overlap a lot. I don't know if it's because you mentioned it, but they're driving me crazy now. I'm gonna move them out. Hang on. Oh, you hear that? As soon as I disturb them, they're like, oh shit. Hearing like half the box. Babe. Oh, where are you? I'm putting your crickets in the laundry room because they're loud. Okay. Okay. All right, that was one box. There is another box, but they've been quiet, so we'll see. Okay, so let's get through the appendicular skeleton lecture-wise and get a feel for what we need to know for that, and hopefully that'll make the lab clearer.
What about the study guide, Ashley?
Oh my God, I need to work on the study guide. I got halfway through it and then I forgot about it.
Oh, okay.
I'll get it up for you guys like today or tomorrow by the latest. I'm so sorry about that. Let me double check what I have for the 14 and 15. Okay. Oh, so I just went with that one image. Oh, I could. Oh, because this included the sternum. That's why. Oh, because this was the thorax. Ah, duh. Okay, never mind. So 40 and 41. So this is what labs 14 and 15 is for the coloring book. That's what I assigned. So it's the pectoral girdle, which is your shoulder bones, and your arms. So that's 14 and 15. And then for 16, passed off all the joint stuff. For lab 16, it's the
you said lab 14 and 15, what pages on the coloring book?
40 and 41. And then lab 16 is pages 46 and 47. And we're gonna find out right now how much the bone markings overlap on the coloring book versus the lab manual. You may need to add a few in from the lab manual, but that's not the end of the world. It keeps the lab manual still worth something. So you didn't spend, what was it, like $120 on that thing for nothing. We're gonna still use it.
Sorry, you said lab 16 coloring book, what number?
46 and 47.
Okay.
14 and 15 are pages 40 and 41, and lab 16 is 46 and 47 in the coloring book.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've been all my coloring book pages. Do we have to, if we like add any markings, should I go back and add them in?
You can. I'm looking for completeness. It's up to you because it's going to be such an important tool for you to study from. So I would totally go back and mark them in for yourself, but I wouldn't worry about re-uploading it.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. All right, you guys, let's start on the appendicular skeleton. In your textbook, it starts on page 255. Get this up here going again. Sorry, my book. Keep organized. Okay. So the axial skeleton, to reiterate from last time, which was like over a week ago now. No, not quite. Yeah, over a week ago, like a week and a half ago. the axial skeleton makes the axis of your body, right? So it's your skull, your thoracic cage, which includes your ribs and your sternum, and your vertebrae, right? Your spine. So the bones of your vertebrae, of your vertebral spine are your axial skeleton. Everything else is your appendicular skeleton. So it's basically your limbs, your arms and legs, and the bones that attach those to your axial skeleton. So we call the bones that attach the limbs to the axial skeleton your girdles, and you have two of them. The pectoral girdle attaches your arms to your axial skeleton, and the pelvic girdle attaches your legs to your axial skeleton. And whereas the axial skeleton is mostly used for protection of vital organs and support, your appendicular skeleton, its main function is movement, right? Your skeletal muscles attach to your appendicular skeleton for you to be able to move around. So again, here's this same picture that I used for the axial skeleton, but instead of focusing on the green bones today, we're going to be focusing on the yellowish brown bones of your pectoral girdle and arms and pelvic girdle and legs, and including all of these bones, which we'll go over each one of them. So don't try and memorize them yet. We'll get there. So your pectoral girdle, right? Your shoulder girdle includes your scapulae, which are your shoulder blades, and your clavicles, according to different, let's see. Oh yeah, it does. Okay. So according to your textbook, it does include the clavicles. According to your lab manual, for some reason, I feel like he put the clavicle like at the end with like random bones, and I don't feel like it's a random bone. It's part of your pectoral girdle, but whatever. I've got chats here. Share the number of each page for labs here. I'll type them out for you. So lab 14 and 15.
I got it, Ashley. You could keep teaching.
I'm gonna type it out for everybody else anyway. That was 40 and 41, and lab 16 equals 46 and 47. Okay, so that way everybody's got that. Alrighty, so your scapulae and your clavicles, okay?
Professor, sorry about that. The pages that you're referencing, these are pages in what book?
In the coloring book, sorry.
Oh, okay. So if we don't have the coloring book, if we're just depending on you, we don't have to worry about the pages.
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
I will
Thank you.
provide it to you in the assignments. So the assignments are going to have the correct pages already there for you to download. But if you've got the physical copy and you want to know which pages correspond to what because you're not using the download ones, then that is for you.
Got it. Thank you. I'm so sorry.
Well, no worries at all. No worries at all. This is why we're here. It's getting a little bit confusing, but I feel like it's totally worth it with the coloring book because it's just like such a great hands-on thing for you guys to do to help you study and something for you to turn in as well. So your scapulae, which are your shoulder blades, and your clavicles, which are these here, right? These bones right here are the bones that connect your arms to the your thoracic cage specifically. The clavicle is going to interact with your sternum, right, at that clavicular notch that we learned about a couple weeks ago. And your scapulae do not actually touch any bone besides your arm bone, right? They don't actually touch the thorax. They are floating on muscle, which is totally weird and kind of creepy, but very, very cool. Let me make that smaller and zoom in here so that you can kind of see how your scapulae, they're not actually attached to the bones of your thoracic cage. I do have screen share on, right? I'm like, now I'm doubting myself. You guys can see what I'm pointing at, I hope.
Yeah.
Okay, good. It's not actually attached to any of your ribs or anything. It's actually sitting, there's actually muscle that sits over your rib cage that your scapulae sit on top of, which is pretty weird and cool. I'm gonna be using this a lot. This is the Wiley Plus Real Anatomy skeleton. So in your real anatomy, I'm using this guy to point out bones, and the bones from different angles, because I feel like that's really important for these bones in particular. Your appendicular skeleton needs a lot of angles to look at. So if I were to pull the clavicle away from the skeleton, take it out of context, this is what it looks like. It's got a vague sort of S shape to it. The rounded end is always going to be the end that interacts with your shoulder out here. It's the lateral end, right? It's farther away from the midline, so it's over here. And the medial end is flattened at the edge here. And that is where it's going to interact with your sternum at the clavicular notch. The only other things, the only markings that are asked for in the lab manual on page 46, because he put the clavicle as like random miscellaneous bones at the very end, which is fine. They are kind of weird. Clavicles, I guess, are kind of weird. He does have a few of the markings there. Basically, all they are each end. So the acromial end, the acromial end is the lateral end. So it's the rounded end over here, acromial end. And the medial end is called the sternal end because it interacts with your sternum, okay? And then the only other things are the conoid tubercle, which is this bump here towards the acromial end. Once again, I wish you guys could hold it in your hands so you could feel this bump. This is actually like coming out towards you here, three-dimensionally, right? So this bump, and you can see it on the from a posterior, or so from a superior view, slightly there. That is the conoid tubercle. That is a place for muscles to attach to. And the subclavian groove, subclavian as in like beneath the clavicle. So this is an inferior view and you're looking up at this bone. So think of it as like the S shape is sideways here, like in the actual human body. So it's kind of indenting right here and it's coming out over here. So the S shape is like this when it's actually in context with the rest of the skeleton. So underneath the clavicle, you have the subclavian groove, and that's going to be for a blood vessel to sit there, okay? Blood vessels and nerves and stuff. So those are the four things you need to know for each of your clavicles. You know the acromial end over here by your shoulder, the sternal end, which interacts with your sternum here at the the clavicular notches of your sternum. And you've got the conoid tubercle, which you can't feel really from the outside. It's sort of like down underneath in there. And the subclavian groove you also can't feel, obviously, but that is like underneath your clavicle, like there. Okay, so that's one part of your pectoral girdle. The other major part of your pectoral girdle is the scapula, of course. Scapula is singular, scapulae, if you add an E at the end of there, you make it plural, so you have two scapulae. And we've got a bunch of markings that we're gonna wanna know. Oh, Jesus. For this guy, go away. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so let's start by looking at the clavicle from the front. Okay, so an anterior ventral view of this clavicle is going to be, so this is going to be the lateral side, right? Because this is where your arm, this is where your humerus fits in, and then your spine would be here. I'm just looking at this clavicle right here. Okay, so what you're seeing is basically this exact bone in this exact view is going to be right here. Okay, so this is an anterior view of a right hand clavicle, whereas this is going to be that same right hand clavicle, but from the posterior view. Okay, so this is this, and this is this. Okay, so hopefully we're all oriented here a little bit better. So from the anterior view, we've got, it's kind of a concave shape, right? So it's a little bit like scooped out from the front, right? So that scoop, that shallow indentation is the subscapular fossa. So it's sub because it's beneath the scapula. So basically this surface is going to be in contact with the muscles that are laying over your thoracic cage in the back there. Okay, so it's the subscapular fossa is the side that I'm not touching, right? It's underneath. The superior border is the edge of the scapula that is at the superior side. Okay, so basically the superior border is the border at the top. The vertebral border is the border that is facing the vertebrae, right? So because we're looking at this from the front, the vertebrae would be right here. And the medial or axillary border, which you can see on this view, but is also over here, is the lateral border. Sorry, I think I misspoke. The vertebral border is, of course, the medial border because it is close to the midline of the body, right, which corresponds with your vertebral column. And then the lateral border is the axillary border, which is off to the side, right? And the superior angle is the angle that is at the top. Okay, so this is the superior angle from this view. This is the superior angle from this view. Superior border, vertebral border, vertebral border, axillary border, axillary border. I didn't want to put these all like twice on all these because it was quite busy enough, if you ask me, but these borders are of course on both scapulae and can be viewed from both angles, both angles. Okay, yes.
What's axillary border again?
The axillary border is the lateral border. So it's basically, if you're looking at these scapulae here, the one that is closer to, the edge that is closer to the vertebrae, the vertebral column, is the vertebral border, which is there. And you can kind of see, oh, I guess I could just do this. Duh. So here's the vertebral border of the left scapula, the vertebral border of the right scapula, and the axillary border is out here. So that's the lateral edge, basically, of the scapulae. So an axillary border here and an axillary border here. Let's see if we can see them. Oh yeah, I can see them much better from the front. From an anterior view, axillary border here, axillary border here. So it's basically a medial and a lateral border.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay. All right, so we've got all the edges sorted out, right? And the subscapular fossa, which is on the anterior side of the bone. On the posterior side of the bone, you have this spine. So it's a long, skinny protrusion along the back, and you can feel it on your scapula, on your scapulae, right? You can usually feel the spine of your scapula. It is literally just called the spine of the scapula. In fact, I believe in your lab, all it says is spine. Yep, it's the last one. Spine, the spine of the scapula. So that's on the posterior side of the scapula. You can feel it from the outside. And above it, you have the supraspinous fossa. And below it, you have the infraspinous fossa. Okay, so these are fossae, much like the subscapular fossa on the other side, but these are, of course, on the posterior side of the scapulae, and one is above the spine, and the other is below the spine. Okay, so that's 3 fossae for your scapulae. Subscapular on the anterior side, supraspinous above the spine, and infraspinous below the spine on the posterior side of your scapulae. Okay. All right, so where it gets a little bit weird and confusing, especially when you're looking at a scapula like out of context, if you're holding the bone in your hand and you're looking at it, these 2 processes can get kind of weird. As long as you remember that the spine is on the posterior side, then you can know that this is going to be the acromion process, okay? Recall that this end of the clavicle is called the acromial end. That's because this end of the clavicle interacts with this process of the scapula, okay? The coracoid process is this other massive protrusion lump thing, and it's over here on this bone. And that guy is going to be somewhere above. I'm not sure if you can actually feel it from here or if it's below. So on page on page 256 of your textbook, of your regular textbook, and probably this textbook too, because it's the same textbook. Oh, I should have done that. My Wi-Fi has been like spotty, or it was spotty yesterday. I'm gonna knock on wood. I feel like totally superstitious about it. But I'm just like, dear God, please don't let my Wi-Fi go out the window. All right. So far, so good. It seems like it's fine. Okay. So let's see if we can get an image up here. Hey, look at that. Okay, so this is the picture that I'm talking about on page 256 of your textbook, where you can see the clavicle interacting, of course, with the sternum at the sternal end, and the acromonial end of the clavicle is interacting with the acromion process of the scapula. So this is the coracoid process of the scapula. That is right here, which is like out in front. Kind of weird. Anyway, it's below your clavicle, so I don't think you can actually feel it, which seems weird because it seems like it's protruding a lot, but based on this image, right? So these 2 processes are sticking out of the clavicle. The acromion comes up from the back and is continuous with the scapular spine, or the spine of the scapula, and the coracoid process comes out anteriorly and inferiorly to the acromonial process. This, of course, then is called the acromioclavicular joint, right? So it's a combination of the 2 things. Acromioclavicular joint is going to be that joint right there. Anyway, not what we're talking about right now. We're talking about scapula. Did I miss any terms here? We've got our borders, we've got our angle, we've got the supraspinatus, the supraspinous or supraspinatus fossa, the infraspinatus fossa, the acromion process, the coracoid process, over there, the glenoid cavity. Okay, so this guy, the glenoid cavity, is literally the socket of the ball and socket joint that is your shoulder joint. Okay, so the head of the humerus fits into the glenoid cavity, okay, on the scapula.
I have a question, actually.
Go for it.
For the acro joint, okay. On the slide, you have it as acro, like just in case, like you asked us for the lab. Yeah. What is this? Are you expecting us to literally write the whole thing, like
one process, as opposed to
The one in the book.
Oh, so you mean the acromioclavicular joint?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good question because this is an important distinction. The acromion process is a bone. The acromial end is talking about a bone. When you put those two together, we're specifically talking about the joint that those two bones make together. We're not talking about joints yet, so don't worry about the acromioclavicular joint yet.
Okay,
I don't think
perfect.
we'll talk about the acromioclavicular joint ever. But it's really good. It's really good for me to be able to point out to you guys that that's what that means. And that's when in general, you see these kinds of like mashed together words, it's often a joint because it's named after the two bones that are interacting at that articulation at the joint.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So the acromioclavicular joint is where the acromial process of the scapula and the clavicle interact right there. Yes, excellent question. So the glenoid cavity is even harder to see in this image. So I'm gonna move over here and see that it is also difficult to see from this image. You can get a little view of it from a lateral view. This is actually probably the best view right here. So it's the socket of this ball and socket joint. The head of the humerus goes into the glenoid cavity, and that's why, because of its roundness, you get that full range of motion for your shoulder. Okay. Yep, same deal. Okay. All right. So, oh, I didn't talk about I didn't even label the inferior angle. The inferior angle is this one right here. I'm gonna have to re-upload this. What else is new? Re-upload PowerPoint. Because that's what I was doing. It's like I forgot what the hell I was doing. I want the inferior Here we go. Oh my God, what is happening? We're gonna get there. Would like one of these as well, please. And that is going to be this right there, okay? So the superior angle is at the top and the inferior angle is at the bottom, okay? So this is the inferior angle as well, okay? And that is all of the parts of the scapula. Any questions about your pectoral girdle yet so far? So far, so good. Shall we move down the arm? Shoulder bone's connected to the arm bone. Let's talk about the upper limb. So your arm, the upper limb, has a bunch of bones, obviously. The upper arm bone or the arm bone is your humerus. Your forearm, your lower arm, is made up of two bones, right? Your radius and your ulna, which rotate around each other, which is why we can like grab things like this. And the hand has a bunch of carpals, has 8 carpals, which are your wrist bones. And you got 5 metacarpals and 5 phalanges. We'll talk about each and every one of them in a bit, but let's start with the humerus. So here's our humerus. According to our coloring book, now if I revisit this a little bit, we do have most of the stuff for the clavicle, not any of the borders or angles, but we have the acromion. Oh, I see what you're saying. So in the coloring book, it says acromion instead of acromial process. Is that what you're asking? Oh, it's called the acromion in the book. I see what you're saying. I'll have to accept either then, since it's both in your book and in the coloring book. So I'll accept the acromion or the acromion process, either way. Okay. And then when we go down to the humerus, we'll start at the part that's closest to the clavicle, shall we? Or the scapula. So the part that interacts with that glenoid cavity of the scapula is the head of the humerus. It's capped by hyaline cartilage, of course, right? So that's this white stuff, I think, is what they're trying to depict here, is that cartilage cap on the end of that bone. You also are going to have cartilage in the socket as well. Okay, cool. So look at this. So this is a lateral view. So you're looking like down across the scapula in like this direction. And you can see that also this glenoid cavity is lined with hyaline cartilage. And you get another strange view of the acromion process and the coracoid process, and how they're, God, it just looks so weird. It's like an alien bone, how they are situated on the scapula. Again, remember the acromion process, or the acromion, is continuous with the spine. So if you have trouble or you're wondering which one you're looking at, the acromion process is going to be the one that's continuous with the spine on the posterior side of the scapula. This is the glenoid cavity, coracoid process. What else can we see here that we couldn't really see before? Of course, the inferior angle. We've got the that lateral border as well, right? Because this is the side that your arm is on. It's the side that's farther away from your vertebral column. Okay. Anyway, the head of the humerus. Moving on down. Well, before we get to the neck of the humerus, or either neck of the humerus, you've got the greater tubercle of the humerus. Okay, so the head of the humerus is really like this rounded part here at the top that interacts with the glenoid cavity of the scapula. The greater tubercle, a tubercle being a rounded bump or projection, is here on the superior, on the proximal end of the bone. And it's actually going to be where where some of your deltoid muscles are going to be like pulling on that right there. You can actually maybe feel the greater tubercle on your humerus. The intertubercular groove, which is also in your lab manual, is going to be the groove that is in between this greater tubercle and the lesser tubercle, which is right next to it. So the greater tubercle is going to be, of course, larger than the lesser tubercle. And you can see from this angle, since we're looking here at a, this would be an anterior view and this would be the posterior view. From the anterior view, you can see the greater tubercle is actually more posterior than the lesser tubercle. So the lesser tubercle is closer to the front and the greater tubercle is closer to the back. And the intertubercular groove goes right down in between them. On the humerus, there are two different places that can be referred to as the neck of the bone: the surgical neck and the anatomical neck. So the anatomical neck is going to be basically between the head and the rest of the bone. So basically that's kind of more of a like a biologist way of looking at it, or like a somebody who studies bones, how they would look at it, because it's just technically where the head meets the rest of the bone is going to be the neck. So that's the anatomical neck. But the surgical neck is what medical doctors are going to refer to when they're talking about the neck of the humerus. It's going to be the surgical neck usually. Okay, so the anatomical neck is where the head of the humerus meets the rest of the bone. And so it's before the greater and lesser tubercles, whereas the surgical neck will be after the greater and lesser tubercles. And it's just kind of the place where it gets narrow after the head of the bone. Going down the shaft, right, the diaphysis, remember, of this long bone, okay, the humerus. We have first, I want to point out the deltoid tuberosity. And this is really cool. It's actually quite visible if you're looking at a real skeleton. Watch it not be though when I, oh no, here you go. See this deltoid tubercle. So where this kind of like comes out like a bump right here on the humerus. You can kind of see it from here too. That is where your where the end of your deltoid muscles, which reach all the way over your shoulder, is going to attach to the bone all the way down here. Okay, that's how it's able to raise your bone so far, right? If it was only pulling from here, then you'd only be able to raise your arm a little bit, right? Because of physics. If it pulls from all the way down here, then it can pull your arm all the way up. So the deltoid tuberosity is the tuberosity that your deltoid attaches to the bone at. Make sure that I'm not leaving anybody. Oh, okay. So we've got the deltoid tuberosity, and right next to it, though it's kind of hard to see in this image, and it's probably even harder to see over here. Yeah, not great. Let's try the textbook. Oh yeah, look at that. They've got it really exaggerated here. The deltoid tuberosity being this part that's kind of poking out, sticking out right here. And the radial groove, which is right next to it. So the radial groove is where the radial nerve is going to come down the humerus, okay? So it's pretty hard to differentiate on most accounts. If I were to ask you about it in an exam, I would probably like ask you like what groove it is, like I would specify. The deltoid tuberosity, you're going to want to know it's the only marking on the diaphysis or the shaft of this bone. So know your deltoid tuberosity. The radial groove is just going to be, it's a groove that's right next to the deltoid tuberosity. It sits right up next to it. So yeah, not terribly easy to see. It's on the medial side.
You're saying those are the only two markings that we need to remember for the humerus?
For the diaphysis of the humerus.
Okay, thank you.
And this is actually, should be out here a little bit. That's going to be more accurate. Gonna get all anal over here. Sorry, guys. Let me just make it right. Okay. All right. And then down at the distal end of the humerus, you have a bunch of stuff going on down here that you need to know. Basically, whereas you have tubercles on the proximal end of the bone, you have condyles and epicondyles at the distal end of the bone. And this is true of all of your long bones, okay? So tubercles at the top and condyles at the bottom, or epicondyles above the condyles, right? So we've got only epicondyles on the lab manual, which is fine with me. So let's talk about these condyles. So condyles are also bumps or projections where muscles, or in the case of the elbow joint, I believe more like ligaments attach to. And there is a medial epicondyle and a lateral epicondyle. And of course, the medial epicondyle is going to be medial or closer to the midline. You can tell which side of the bone is the midline by where the head of the humerus is, right? So this is the part that's going to be interacting with the scapula, right? So that's going to be the medial side of the humerus, right? It's going to be the side that's closer to the midline. So the medial condyle is going to be directly down from that. And the lateral epicondyle is going to be on the same side as the greater tubercle, right? So it's going to go down, it's going to be down here. In between your two epicondyles, you've got what is called the capitulum. Yep. The capitulum, I just realizing that I don't know what its purpose is. So the capitulum, a rounded knob on the lateral aspect of the bone that articulates with the head of the radius. Okay, so this particular bump down here, which is actually technically a condyle, but it's got a special name because it has a very specific purpose. It's called the capitulum, and this is where your humerus interacts with your radial bone, your radius. So we'll see in a second the end of the radius that's going to be interacting with the capitulum of the humerus. And on the same, along the same lines, the trochlea, okay, is going to be where the ulna, it's a spool shaped surface articulates with the trochlear notch of the ulna. Yeah, so this is where the other lower arm bone interacts with the humerus. So your two lower arm bones are going to interact at the capitulum and the trochlea, the radius interacting at the capitulum, and the ulna interacting at the trochlea. Okay, and then on the posterior side of the bone, you can see this indentation, this deep fossa, and that is called the olecranon fossa. And you're gonna have like nerves and blood vessels and stuff right there. It's actually, I'm sorry, that's not true. You're actually going to have an open, this is actually an open space where the, where I believe the ulna, there you go, fits into the back here. So when you straighten your arm, that ulna has a little place to go, right? And that is going to be the olecranon fossa, okay? That's just where the end of your ulna fits in with your humerus when your arm is straight, okay? All right, what else? What have I missed? Anything? Greater tubercle, lesser tubercle, lateral, medial, epicondyles, capitulum, olecranon fossa, the intertubercular groove, the radial groove, the trochlea, the coronoid fossa. Oh, it's on the anterior side. Oh yeah, okay, so we've got a radial fossa and a coronoid fossa for when you bend your arm. So all of these fossae here at the distal end of the humerus, their purpose is to give the lower arm bones a place to go when you move your arm around, okay? So when you straighten your elbow, the end of your ulna has it's your elbow, right? So it kind of projects out, and so it kind of has to fit into that olecranon fossa that's on the back of the humerus. On the front of the humerus, when you bend your arm this way, when you flex your arm, those two bones of your lower arm are going to have a little place for their heads to fit into. The coronoid fossa is where the anterior side of your ulna is going to go, and the radial fossa is where the radius is going to fit in. Okay, so again, radius, ulna, they're going to fit into the humerus in their appropriate, the ends of them, the little parts that stick out have to like fit into these little fossae on the humerus so that you have full range of motion at your elbow joint. And I think I got everything. I think we got everything on the humerus. Any questions on the humerus? We'll move down to the lower arm bones and see what those look like. You good?
We're good.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, so this is that distal end of the humerus that we were just examining right here. Boom, there it is. So this is going to be that little coronoid fossa. The radial fossa is going to be here because this edge of the ulna, when this arm gets flexed like this, has to fit into this little fossa right here. And this little edge on the end of the radial bone is going to fit into that fossa, that radial fossa right there. And again, see how the radius bone interacts with the capitulum of the humerus, and the ulna interacts with the trochlea right here, okay? So that's what those two condyles are so important for. And then here's your medial epicondyle and your lateral epicondyle. Remember, epi is like on top of, so epicondyles are above the regular, the condyles, the proper condyles of the bone. Okay, so let's talk about these two guys right here who are rotating around each other, right? And that's really important to note because anatomical position is so super important. I'm gonna stand up actually. Anatomical position is super important because when you're in anatomical position, your radius is lateral and your ulna is medial, right? If you're not in anatomical position, if you have your hand supinated, if you will, your radius suddenly becomes medial and your ulna suddenly becomes lateral, right? So they swap places. So the way that you know, no matter what, if it's attached to an arm, if it's attached to a hand, really, which one is the radius and which one is the ulna, use this simple and stupid way of remembering, which has worked for me for all these years, which is that the radius is rad. Your radius is always associated with your thumb. Okay, so the radius is always on the thumb side. Your radius is rad. And then the ulna is the other one, okay? So if you're looking at the bones out of context, right, individually, if you don't have them side by side or they're not attached to a hand for you to see that the radius is associated with the thumb and the ulna is not, this is how you're going to be able to identify them. The radius has this really nifty end on it that looks sort of like a weird, like horse foot kind of a thing going on there. And that is a strictly radius weird thing, okay? So that is always going to be at the proximal end of the radius is this weird little like horse hoof looking end, okay? Let's see, do we have, oh yeah, so here it is again from another angle. There it is over there. What else we got? Oh, that's it. Okay. This is actually pretty nice. How about up here? Ooh, okay, so check that out. We got horse hoof happening up here at the proximal end of the radius. All right, so this is what the radius looks like as a real life bone. Ooh, that's got a really weird horse hoof thing going on there. Radius again. And the ulna has this fantastic bottle opener. Dude, like seriously, if I could get a hold of a human ulna legally to have for myself, I would totally use it as a freaking bottle opener because check it out. You can't really see it so well, I don't think, from any other view. Let's take a look at the textbook. Oh yeah, here we go. So check this out. This is that end of the ulna. This is your elbow right here. This little guy is the point of your elbow, the one that you always hit things with, that you bang on everything, is right here. So the trochlea, remember, of the humerus fits right in here, and that's how you get your hinge joint of your elbow. So of course, this is going to be lined with hyaline cartilage, and it just makes like such a really weird, cool C shape right around the trochlea of the humerus, which would also make it, I think, like a really cool bottle opener. And someday I'm gonna have one for myself. They sell human bone places.
I have a question. So when we hit our elbow and they said it's a funny bone, so can you kind of, what?
I know, it's so dumb, right? Like the humerus, it's called the humerus. Like how is not the humerus? It's actually technically not the humerus. It's your ulna. It's actually your ulna. If you hold your elbow, the tip of your elbow, and you bend it, you bend your arm, you can feel that it's actually a part of this bone up here, right? It's not moving away from your humerus. It's actually part of your lower arm bone if you feel your elbow. if you can tell. This right here, which is actually that's this right here, right? So it's the part right underneath. So maybe that's what they're talking about when they talk about the funny bone.
Right here, right? The inner
here, because it's got the, you can actually feel the nerve that's passing over that. I think, I don't know what, it's not the radial nerve, so we'll talk about it next semester for sure. Whatever the heck nerve this is, I'll have to learn what it is before then. But yeah, so if this is considered the funny bone, then that makes sense because it actually is part of the humerus. It actually is this, it's your medial epicondyle. So if someone says, oh, I hit my funny bone, say, no, you hit your medial epicondyle. Be a total bone snob.
Oh my, wait, I have a quick question. Now that you're brought up for next semester, are we going to be online?
God, I hope not. Actually, they don't want to offer any of the like anatomy courses online ever again.
Are you serious?
It's supposed to be like the only time that they will ever let anatomy courses online because you guys are trying to be nurses. Like it's totally unrealistic for you guys to like get as good of an education online.
Yeah.
In person. So what will happen is either we'll be back and we'll meet in person, or they will probably cancel the class, honestly. I actually was scheduled to teach a Bio 1 class over the summer. And since that's the only class that they're willing to compromise on, we're talking about the department. That's the only class that they decided like, well, we could probably do that one online because it's for like non-majors, right? So it's like, it's not as huge a deal as it is for like nursing classes and stuff to have it online. So I totally got bumped by like full-time people. So I got bumped out of my class because that's the only class for the entire biology department that we're offering online for the summer.
Okay. Well, hopefully we're back in school by the time so we could.
No, I'm gonna be quite upset if we don't end up having those classes because I don't think I'll be able to grab a Bio 1 by then either. I certainly don't have the seniority to be bumping anybody, so that would be good. I'm hoping that we'll be back long before then. But yeah, if we're still online by then, I don't think they're gonna offer it. I don't think they'll offer it. Yeah, kind of.
Are you talking about fall semester, Professor?
Yep.
Talking about fall.
So this could possibly push all of us back. We're waiting on the second part of anatomy. Is that what you're asking, DJ?
Yep.
Yeah.
Because if they don't want to, like, if we don't get back to school this this fall, and they won't take this, like, we won't be able to do this online.
Yeah.
So we might have to just take it next year.
I mean, I guess there's a possibility that if it turns into like, well, for sure we're not going to be able to come back for the fall, and we have a bunch of time, and can we somehow shift the classes to an online format, but like a real online format, not like this emergency weird mission that we're dealing with right now. Like online classes are good. They're good. They're meant to be good if they're designed appropriately. But obviously none of us had a chance to like actually design an online class. So we're working with what we have for this semester, but the faculty they're adamant that it's like, we can't have like anatomy, we can't have people that we're going to be sending out to be nurses in our world, you know, taking classes like this as like their entire education. Like, yeah,
that makes sense. So I want to be hands-on.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's only so much that you can learn through a computer. And nursing is just one of those like exceptional classes where it's just like, they're just drawing the line, just like for you guys, really, obviously, you know.
Yeah.
You got to draw the line somewhere. It's like, you can't just make us teach online forever now because some classes, it's not safe. It's just not, it's not good. And it's not safe, you know, thinking long term. So
yeah.
It sucks though. Cause yeah, it's going to push us back if that's the case. So no, I specifically requested a section. They offered me a Bio 1 section for the fall again. And I was like, no. I want to teach.
Are you gonna be easy on bio? This
it's gonna be a lot easier.
Oh my god.
This would have been a little bit weird because it would have been obviously online, so I would have had to like what to do with that. But yeah, if I ever teach it again, I think it might be different than how
Lucky us. Question for the tuberosity.
Mhm.
Because I know that there's like radial, ulnar, and where's the other one? Deltoid. So the tuberosity is just a lump.
Yep, exactly. It's totally, so this is one of those parts of the bone where, remember Wolff's Law when we talked about bone structure and how mechanical force can cause a bone to change. It'll cause the osteoblasts to lay down more bone tissue. So when you grow your delts, right, when you like do like lifting exercises like this and get beefy shoulders, you're also growing your deltoid tuberosity because those muscles are pulling on it harder, right? So according to Wolff's Law, you're going to put down more bone material right there. So yeah, it's literally just a little lump that the tendons of those muscles can grab onto.
Got it.
The radial tuberosity is again a little lump. Was there, what was the other one? Did I not put it on here?
It's no, I think it's the ulnar and radial, and then what else?
What's the ulnar?
Deltoid, but that was not. That was the previous slides, I think.
I think there's just the two. Am I mistaken? There's just the deltoid.
No, yeah, but the humerus has it too, but that's a deltoid.
Yeah, but I only see a radial tuberosity. I don't think there is an ulnar tuberosity.
On page 263
of the text
of the book? Yeah, 263.
Oh yeah, there totally is. Well, it's not in your lab manual, so
Okay.
I'm not going to ask you to know it. Is it in our coloring book? I'm curious to know. It doesn't look like it. There isn't a whole lot of detail markings wise in the coloring book for these guys, but there's no, don't worry about the ulnar tuberosity. It does this a similar function as the radial tuberosity, but for whatever reason it's been omitted from the actual lab manual. We have the radial tuberosity for the radius, but no ulnar tuberosity for the ulna. So
Sounds good to me.
sounds good, right? Me too. One less thing to remember and grade. Okay, so now that we know roughly how to tell the difference between the radius, which has a horse hoof on the proximal end, and the ulna, which has a bottle opener at the proximal end, let's talk about some of the markings of these guys, okay? Starting at the proximal end. So of course you have the head of the radius. There isn't so much like a single head of the ulna, at least not on the proximal end. So they kind of have like a distal head of the ulna down here, which is, you know, that's whatever, that's fine. But the head of the radius is the horse hoof. The radial tuberosity is again a little lump here for a muscle to attach to. No markings going down the diaphysis of these long bones that I see. And down at the distal end, we've got some fun stuff happening. So first, let me point out these styloid processes, okay? So a styloid process is a sort of a, it's like a pointy, like a tooth. Styloid process, think like a stylus, right? Like a pen or something. It's like at the pointy end of a pen. And you have one on the lateral edges of both of these bones. So basically think of these as like the outer, the place where your lower arm bones sort of like wrap around your wrist bones, okay? So when you put these two styloid processes in context with the wrist, they end up being like the bumps of what you consider to be like your wrist, but it's really your lower arm bones, the ends of your lower arm bones. So the styloid processes are kind of like project down over the rest of your wrist bones. So here's the little ulnar styloid process and the little radius styloid process over there. And if we're looking at these guys from an anterior view, which I guess this is supposed to be, this should be like, I feel like more curled like this, because you have sort of a, I don't know, maybe not. The hinge joint, whatever. That's just more analness. Ulnar fossa and radial fossa, right? Radial notch. Okay, so we're not talking about condyles or epicondyles. Instead, we've got these notches at the ends of these bones where they fit into each other, okay? So the radial notch of the ulna is the notch on the ulna where the radius fits in, okay? So the radial notch is where the head, or I'm sorry, yeah, the radial notch is where the head of the radius fits into the ulna. And the ulnar fossa, does it have to be a fossa? Notch, okay, it also says notch. So you have a radial notch and an ulnar notch, and that's fine if you want to call it a notch, that's fine. On this thing, I have it called a fossa, which is fine, but I'm gonna add in notch for you guys so that it goes a little bit smoother, goes down a bit smoother. Okay, all right, and so the ulnar notch is a notch on the radius where the head of the ulna fits in, okay? So the ulnar notch is actually a marking on the radius bone, and the radial notch is a marking on the ulnar bone, and it's where the corresponding complementary bone fits in, okay? So I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense? That should make sense.
Ashley, just to add on, I always found this easy. When I was in high school, I took an anatomy, and the easiest way for me to find out which one was the ulna and which one was the radius was the ulna at the top, where you said it looks like a bottle opener. If you hold it to the side, it literally looks like a U.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're looking at it like from here, from this angle, it
Yeah.
looks like, yeah, U as in ulna. Yeah. So if you like turn this sideways, totally a U. Absolutely.
That, I don't know if that helps anyone, but that was how I always identified it.
It probably will. I'm sure it will help. I'm sure it will help. Anything we can get, right?
I found my favorite bone.
The ulna?
The can opener.
Oh yeah, hell yeah, the bottle opener. That U of the bottle opener, right? It's gonna be that's gonna be your ulna. That's gonna be your ulna. So here's from another view, from an inferior view of these bones, right? So your wrist would be here. Your humerus is out here. You can see the ulnar notch of the radius and how the ulna fits right into that little notch. And it doesn't have it labeled here, but the radial notch of the ulna would be right there so that the head of the radius can fit in right there. So aren't they cute? Aren't they a cute couple? I love the radius and ulna. I think they're great. Humans, monkeys, squirrels, and cats are the only animals that have separate lower limb bones that you can do this with. So that's like monkeys obviously can do what we can do. Squirrels can grab nuts, and cats can grab things like this. But you'll notice that your dog will try to like hold things with the paws, but it's much harder for them to do this kind of motion because they have fused radius and ulna. And all other animals have more of like a radio-ulna bone. And it's like a single fused bone for the lower limb. So pretty cool. And if we go down to the hand, we've got all the fun bones in the hand. And it's much scarier to look at first than it really is. It's really not bad. It's actually quite fun. So again, here's your little radius. Here's the styloid process of your radius, kind of minimized here in this cartoon, whereas the styloid process of the ulna is like really prominent. So whatever. But those bones, the distal end of the radius in particular is going to interact with the bones of your wrist. So you've got a bunch of little short bones, right? So these are like sort of cube-shaped little chunky bones in there. So remember, since there are short bones, they're going to be full of spongy bone tissue, right? And therefore red bone marrow. So these are some of your little short bones of your wrist, short and irregular bones. And there are various mnemonic devices on how to remember these guys. If you remember yours, shout it out. I'm trying to remember mine. But if you go from thumb to wrist, you can kind of like make a little song to learn them from left to right. So basically like the trapezoid, trapezium, capitate, hamate, scaphoid, lunate, and the pisiform. That's your pisiform bone. I don't know why there isn't a line there. Let's make a line. I'm gonna steal a line from you. I didn't even make this drawing. I blame somebody else. Let me make it pretty. That's better. So now it kind of looks like the other ones. Okay. So TTCHSLP would be how your mnemonic device would go. Let me see if I can, I'll find one and send it to you guys. For the hand bones, or the wrist bones, sorry. But there are 8 of them, and that is their names, okay?
Actually, I looked one up. I found one. It says, some lovers try positions that they can't handle.
That's the one that I remember. Yes, some lovers try positions that they can't handle. So that would be going from the scaphoid. So you'd be going from scaphoid to lunate, scaphoid, lunate,
And then to the triquetral,
pisiform,
trapezium, trapezoid,
capitate, all the way to over to hamate. Ugh, I wish they were in order. That's the one that I remember. That's the one that I learned these by too. But I always thought that they were like somehow in order. That's interesting. I wonder if this would be different than that picture there. That's what I suspected. Okay, scaphoid, lunate, triquetform. Nope. Oh yeah, and then going back again. So you're basically going like reading from left to right, like a book. Like this is one sentence. Scaphoid, lunate. I don't know. Wait. Yeah. What the hell? Scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum. Is that because it sort of like comes up and behind? I think that's because it comes up and behind. Most of it is actually posterior, so it's back there. So scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, pisiform, and then all the way back across to trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, hamate. Maybe from the back, maybe from a posterior view, it would make more sense. But then you'd have to go back, you have to go like the opposite way, right? Scaphoid, lunate, triquetform. What about pisiform? Oh yeah, then pisiform is only seen from the front. So it's because we're talking about a 3-dimensional structure. So if you're looking from an anterior view, it does work. Let me see if I can't find a better, yeah, that's not good. We're not doing that one anymore. I'm gonna have to replace that whole thing. We need a good cartoon image that shows all these bones more accurately. Ew. I don't know, man. Some lovers try positions that they can't handle. It works. I just wish I could find an image that made it super clear, but I don't know if there really is one that is also anatomically accurate, because since we're looking at this from we're looking at a three-dimensional thing in a two-dimensional view. So that makes it a little bit harder. That's not going to be super helpful either, because it's all blurry. Yeah, I think the deal is that the pisiform bone is anterior. It's lying on top here. And then you've got the triquetiform that's actually technically like behind it back here. So it does work as long as you know that the triquetiform is like right behind the pisiform and the pisiform is on top of it. And you have to do it from an anterior view. Okay, so this has to be like with the palm up. That's the only way that this works. Okay, so some lovers try positions that they can't handle. I'm gonna try and see if I can't find a really good, maybe a video, maybe like a YouTube video of that for you guys. So those are your wrist bones. There are 8 of them. Those are their names. Learn them how you will. You've got then 5 bones that are actually inside of your hand. So they're actually inside the palm of your hand, and these are your carpal bones, okay? So I'm sorry, these are your metacarpals. Your wrist bones are considered your carpal bones. So your metacarpals are the bones that are inside of your hands, okay? So carpals, metacarpals, right, moving out. And then the bones of your actual fingers are your phalanges, okay? These guys are all numbered, and they're numbered differently in like anatomy than they are in evolutionary biology, so I always get confused. Because in evolutionary biology, we actually evolved this finger first, so it's kind of weird. It goes like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is weird. So the actual way in anatomy, I'm trying to remember if it goes, yeah, it's thumb first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So metacarpal 1, metacarpal 2, metacarpal 3, 4, and 5. And your phalanges have a distal, a middle, and a proximal. And singular for phalanges is phalanx, okay? So you have 1 phalanx, would be this one little bone right here, the distal phalanx. Distal phalanx, distal phalanx, distal phalanx, distal phalanx. Middle, your middle phalanges, here, 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 and here. Oh, so this is technically a hand bone, right? So your thumb only has 2 phalanges, whereas the rest of your fingers have 3. A distal, a middle, and a proximal. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And you've got 2 phalanges of your thumb, and then this is considered actually one of your metacarpals, who is inside of your hand, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Is there a question?
Actually, real quick, yeah, I'm sorry. You said the carpus is your wrist bones, the phalanges are your finger bones, and then what are the metacarpuses considered?
I need to like not even use this image. I think I'm going to replace this image entirely.
Okay.
So your carpal bones, that's CARPAL. So like this is like not even useful. The carpus, I think what they're referring to there is like the wrist area, or like your wrist is your carpus. It's where your carpal bones are.
So it's carpus, but in
I know it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. Hang on. Oh God, forget it. I'm gonna replace this image. It's basically the type of bone. So whereas this set of bones might be referred to as your metacarpus, but the bones themselves are your metacarpal bones. Metacarpal, metacarpal, metacarpal. So your carpal bones are the bones of the wrist. Your metacarpal bones are the bones inside of your hand. So you actually have a bunch of long bones inside the fleshy part of your palm, okay? So these are your metacarpal bones inside of here. And then your phalanges are your fingers, okay? So carpal.
That answered my question. Thank you.
Metacarpals.
Like middle, metacarpal, the middle of the hands.
Yeah, that works. Yeah, absolutely.
Middle of the hands.
Yeah. Okay, so those are your upper limbs. I'm gonna move on to our lower limbs now. Are we ready?
No.
Oh, I'm not either. Okay, so again, starting from proximal to distal, right? Starting from the attachment at your axial skeleton, your pelvic girdle is the girdle that holds your legs to the trunk of your body. Your pelvis is your pelvic girdle, but it's actually composed of two separate bones. There's two halves that attach at the sacrum at the back and the pubic symphysis at the front. So each one of those hip bones, each half of your pelvis, is called a coxal bone. Plural is coxae. So your pelvis is made up of two coxae. Each one is a coxal bone. So they attach the lower limbs to the axial skeleton using strong ligaments. They transmit the weight of the upper body to your lower limbs so that you can walk around. And they also support the pelvic organs. So they actually do have some support and protection aspects in terms of the organs that fit inside of your pelvic bowl, inside of your pelvis. Each coxa has three fused bones. So there's basically three areas that have different names on each coxa, on each coxal bone: the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. Together with the sacrum, which is at the very base of your vertebral column, right? It's that triangular bone with five fused vertebrae. And the coccyx, which is your little tailbone. All of that, the two coxal bones, your sacrum and your coccyx, form the bony pelvis, okay? So when you think of a pelvis, it includes all of those bones. Of course, the sacrum and the coccyx are technically part of the axial skeleton, and the coxal bones, the hip bones on the outside, are considered part of the pelvic girdle, which is part of your appendicular skeleton, okay? So here's a pelvis, and you can see that it includes the sacrum and the coccyx, but these, of course, are part of your axial skeleton. Coxal bone here and coxal bone here are part of your appendicular skeleton. They are your pelvic girdle. And like I was saying, the two coxal bones of your pelvis, of your pelvic girdle, are held together into the axial skeleton right here at the ala of the sacrum. So remember, if you go back in your lab manual to the end of the vertebral column and the sacrum and the markings of that, the parts that attach to the coxal bones of your pelvis is called the ala. And so they attach at the back at your vertebral column right there. And then around the front, they attach again at the pubic symphysis, right? And of course, this is a cartilaginous joint right here. So let's look at the three regions of the coxal bone: the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. Ilium is the most superior, the top part, so your actual like hip bones, when you think about your hip bones. It also articulates with the sacrum at the back, at the sacroiliac joint, right? Because it's the combination of the sacrum and the ilium. And then the ischium is basically just posterior, inferior to that. So it's the part right below the hip bones. And the pubis is that front part where it's connected by the cartilage at the pubic joint, the pubic symphysis joint. All right, let's take a closer look here. All labeled up. Okay, so again, the ilium is your actual, like the hip bone that you can feel from the outside, okay? It includes the iliac crest, okay? So the iliac crest is your actual, the top of your hips. And the iliac crest is part of the ilium, okay? So that's what's this region of the coxal bone is called. It's the ilium. The scoop, the indentation on the inside of the ilium is called the iliac fossa, okay? So you've got a fossa as part of the ilium. You've got a crest and a fossa. You've got the sacroiliac joint. I'm not sure if that's even mentioned in this lab. I do not believe that it is, so don't worry about it. And moving down to the ischium, you're going to have the, it's going to be this bone that makes the the inferior and posterior back here part of the pelvis below the ilium. So it's going to be back here, okay? In front, anteriorly, is the pubic bone, okay? So that's the third region. So region 1, ilium, region 2, ischium, all the way back there, and then region 3 at the front here, the pubic bone, okay? Some other little things to know. I'm pretty sure, okay, so we can't see them from all of the angles, so I know this is not everything. We're gonna get to them. Okay, so the anterior superior iliac spine is going to be the pointy part on the upper and frontmost part of your hip bones that you can feel. Okay, so the iliac crest ends in this spine, which they're calling this like pointy part, this little pointy bit here at the very front. And it's called the anterior superior because it is both anterior and superior. Let's see. Ooh, okay. All right, so if we're looking at it, we're looking at this pelvis from the front, right? We've got the ilium, the iliac crest, the iliac fossa. And if I were to make this skeleton turn to its left, boom. Oops, sorry, I think it turned to its right. Crap, let me just not confuse anybody. Okay, all right. So the skeleton is going to turn to its left, boom. And we've got, again, the iliac crest, right, of the ilium. This is the superior anterior iliac spine right here. Okay, so this is the one that you like hit on door frames, or I do. I always hit it on door frames and it hurts, right? Mm-hmm. So that's that guy right there. Oh yeah, this is all part of the sacrum, so it doesn't even have any business being here. The anterior inferior iliac spine is, of course, just inferior to the superior anterior iliac spine. Okay, so this one is above and in front. This one is below and in front. Okay, at the front of the pelvis. So superior anterior iliac spine, still part of the ilium, and anterior inferior iliac spine, still part of the ilium. Okay, we'll see them better from another angle on a cartoon as well. The pelvic brim is like this top part, the superior part of the pubic bone. So this is at the front. So you can see it, actually the arms are in the way, so you can't really see it from there, but it's going to be right here, the pelvic brim. Is that something that's supposed to be, or that was in your, actually it's not even part of this, I don't think. Let's go to page 46, let's see. What is included?
So I have a quick question.
Go for it.
If you hear my dog in the background, he's
That's
squeaking a toy. Anyway, the two like holes, would you call those a foramen in the ischium?
Those are definitely foramen, and we
Okay.
are going to, I don't think they're labeled in this particular picture, but they are your obturator foramen.
So I was wondering, what do they hold? Like, what goes through them?
Oh man, that is an excellent question. Let me think about that for a second. So all of your organs are here. I think it's literally muscles and nerves and blood vessels. I think it's all of the above that
Okay.
actually pass through here. Yeah.
Okay.
Pass through. See, these are actually the largest foramen or foramina of your body. So
Okay.
they're even bigger than your foramen magnum in your skull. They're the largest that you have in your body. This is what you actually sit on, right? Your ischium is your sit bones. This is what you actually sit on when you're sitting down.
Okay.
Yeah, so good question. Great question. I'm noticing just now that the pelvis in your coloring book is on pages 38 and 39. So I may need to add that to our lab 16. I will absolutely need to add that to our lab 16. I don't know how I missed that. So I'm making a note of it now. And if you have already done it, then awesome. And if not, then it'll become part of the download after our lecture today, pages 38 and 39, because it has all of these great markings and stuff that we're talking about the pelvis, which we need to know. So it really should be part of that. All right, where were we? Pubic symphysis. So let's look at this from another view. We really got a good view of some of the ilium. There is more to it, of course. So this is a picture of one coxal bone. It's going to be this coxal bone specifically, because here is the socket. This is the socket where your femur, where the head of your femur goes into. And here it is there. So here's your ilium. Here's the iliac crest up here, the anterior superior iliac spine, the anterior inferior iliac spine. Of course, we can't see the iliac fossa from this angle, right? Because it's behind there. On this posterior slash lateral view, so back behind here of the ilium, you can see a couple of interesting sort of like ridges, but they're not ridges, they're lines, right? Which is basically a much smaller, more subtle version of a ridge. You've got one that is closer to the front, so it is anterior, and one that is closer to the back, so it is posterior, and they are both gluteal lines, okay? The anterior gluteal line and the posterior gluteal line are part of the ilium, and they are very slight projections that your gluteal muscles attach to, okay? So this is part of where your butt muscle attaches to your pelvis. Back here, where we couldn't see before, it was completely invisible to us from the anterior view, we've got the posterior superior iliac spine and the posterior inferior iliac spine. Okay, I know this seems crazy because when you look at the right hip bone and the from one side to another, it looks, when it's by itself like a coxal bone, it looks like ridiculous. Like it's just really confusing, right? So it's a matter of being able to tell the difference between your ischium and your pubic bone, because the pubic bone is going to be anterior. It's going to be the front, okay? So you're going to know then that this is your anterior superior iliac crest as opposed to your posterior one. And this is your anterior inferior iliac spine as opposed to your posterior one. Did I say crest? I meant spine here, right? You just have to know which one is anterior and which one is posterior. And to do that, you need to know that this is your ischium, which is in purple here, and this is your pubis, or your pubic bone, okay? So when we look at it from a couple of other angles, I'm hoping that it'll be a little bit clearer which one is which, and that way you'll be able to orient yourself when you're looking at this bone. So let's move down to the ischium and talk about some markings here. oh wait, I've got one more line to talk about. Oh, and the notch. Okay, so you've got an anterior gluteal line, a posterior gluteal line, and an inferior gluteal line. And all of these are just places where your gluteal muscles attach to. And finally, the greater sciatic notch. So this great big notch right here, which of course you can't really see from the anterior view. Do we have a posterior view? We should get a posterior view. Is going to be where, partly where your sciatic nerve is situated. So let's see if we can get a good view. Oh yeah, so check that out. So your sciatic nerve is going to emerge from inside of you here. It's actually going to emerge from your spine, right? And come out to innervate your legs through here. So the sciatic notch is that space for your sciatic nerve to come down and go to the rest of your legs. What else can we see from here that we couldn't see before? Not so much the gluteal lines, because this is not a great, it's not great quality picture here. But we can see the ischium, where you sit, what you sit on, and the pubis or pubic bone over anterior, away from us, right? Because it's a posterior view. You can see the, you can see the superior anterior iliac spine. You can't really see the inferior anterior iliac spine, but we got a really nice view of the posterior superior iliac spine and the posterior inferior iliac spine from here. Okay, so we've got all of our iliac spines, depending on whether or not they are front, back, top, or bottom, right? An anterior posterior, an anterior inferior, and a posterior superior, and a posterior inferior. Did I get that right? I think I did. Okay, so those are your ilia, right? Ilium, ilium, ilia, plural. Iliac bones. Let's move down to the ischium, which is in purple in this picture. You've got the main brunt of it, which is going to be your ischial body. So most of it is the ischial body. And sorry, I'm just thinking back to how to pronounce this, acetabulum. All right, anyway, the ischial body is like the main chunk of the ischium. You've got this little bump here called the ischial spine, okay? So that is definitely ischium there. And the lesser sciatic notch is just below the ischial spine, okay? So the greater sciatic notch is actually part of the ilium, and the lesser sciatic notch is part of the ischium. And then the ischial tuberosity is this like rough, bumpy portion that you actually sit on when you're sitting down. Okay, so it's like the bottom of the ischium here, and then where it goes to meet the pubis over here is the ischial ramus. So again, a ramus is like an arm or like a longer part of a bone. The other ramus that we have seen is the ramus of the mandible. The ramus of the mandible goes up to form the joint of your jaw, right? So it's like this like sort of thinner part of the bone that connects the rest of the bone to a joint. So the ramus of the ischium is connecting the body, the ischial body to the next bone, which is the pubis. Ischial tuberosity. This opening is the obturator foramen, and now I just have to know what goes through the obturator. Actually, if your textbook is any good, it would tell us. Let's see.
Ashley.
Yeah.
It kicked out Jessica and Liz off the video. So.
And the password doesn't work anymore?
No.
Naturally. Okay, let's see, out of curiosity. That looks like the same password to me.
Jessica, are you back on? I think she's back on.
Yeah, I'm here. It kicked me off earlier, but then it put me back on, but Liz can't get back on.
With the and did you use the same password to get back on?
It's weird because it didn't even need me to do it. It wanted to update, and then it just kicked me off, and then it put me back in. And then I had unstable internet too, so I'm gonna have to rewatch because some of it was kind of like
spotty.
weird. Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, I hope that she can come back on, and if not, I'm recording locally, so there isn't a risk of it being lost to the cloud. And I'll upload it as soon as I can, but since it's not giving me like a different password, I was gonna assume that it's the same password to get in both times, and I don't know why it wouldn't let her back on. I don't know. That's really frustrating. Why? Liz, come back. What was I looking for? The obturator foramen. The obturator foramen, the largest foramen in the skeleton. Foramen is so named because even though blood vessels and nerves pass through it, it is nearly completely closed by the fibrous obturator membrane. Whoa. Well, that's pretty cool. The obturator membrane is what I want to see then. Wow, that's really neat. I don't know, like, it would take some more research to find out what the purpose of that is, but it looks like it just closes up those obturator foramen. That's really cool. Interesting. Anyway, sorry. I like teaching anatomy because it's interesting, but I don't know all of it, so there's still parts of it that pique my curiosity. Okay, so the obturator foramen is of course a foramen, and therefore, for a foramina, it's a foramen, so it's got a, so it's a hole. The pubis, the pubic bone, is again at the front. Okay, so this is at the front of your body, anterior most point of your body, of your groin. It's got, of course, a ramus of its own, right? So the ischial ramus is here. The pubic ramus is here. There is a superior and an inferior pubic ramus. So this one is the inferior. The superior pubic ramus is going to be up here, but we can't see it from this angle. In fact, pubic tubercle, pubic crest, pubic symphysis. I don't have it on that one, so I'll probably have it on the next one. The pubic bone also has a body, okay? So you have an ischial body and a pubic body. It has an inferior ramus and a superior ramus. And then the obturator foramen is in between the ischium and the pubis. And this guy right here is a cavity in which the head of your femur fits in to form the ball and socket joint of your hip. And its special name is acetabulum, okay? Acetabulum is what we call that. So let's take this same bone and we're just gonna flip it 180 degrees, okay? So we're looking at it from a lateral view, and I'm gonna flip it and look at it from a medial view, okay? So this is just the medial view of that same bone. So here's the anterior superior iliac spine, the anterior inferior, the posterior superior, and the posterior inferior iliac spines. Here is where the ala of the sacrum fits in, right? So this is right here, where that sacrum fits in, is right here. We're looking at it sideways, right? So here's our ilium, here's the ischium back here, also are still in purple. Greater sciatic notch of the ilium, the lesser sciatic notch of the ischium, ischial spine, obturator foramen, the ischial ramus interacting with the inferior pubic ramus, and here is the superior pubic ramus, which I believe, yeah, it's going to be this. It'll be here. So this will be the superior pubic ramus. Do we need to know that pubic tubercle? How important is that? I'm wondering. Pubic bone area. That's not ideal. Ischiopubic ramus. Oh, interesting. Okay, so the way that Dr. Sternberg did these ramuses is that instead of having an ischial and an inferior pubic ramus, he did an ischiopubic ramus. An ischiopubic ramus. That's interesting. So this is the superior pubic ramus. This is where the pubic symphysis is. Okay, so this is where that cartilage is, right here. Okay, is right here. So basically it's like we're on the inside of the pelvis looking at the inside part of it, okay? All right, what have I not gotten to? Don't worry about this. I don't believe this is something that we need to know. Auricular surface. Inferior ramus, articular surface of the pubic symphysis. That you will want to know, the articular surface of the pubic symphysis. Yeah, and the, God, it would be nice if you had these in alphabetical order, wouldn't it? I don't think that's a thing either. And these other, like pubic tubercle. I don't see that in the list either. I'm gonna have to clean this one up too. Okay, I'll clean that one up too. Okay. All right. Any questions about the pelvic girdle? I know that there's a lot. I'm going to clean this up. We are going with the lab manual in terms of the different bones and markings that you need to know. Only some of them are provided in the coloring book, but the most important ones, arguably, I would say are, but they're on pages 38 and 39 of your coloring book. So I'm going to have to add those into the assignment for assignment number 16. Oh, so I have some stuff to do. 16. Okay. But I'm going to move on down to the femur, the upper leg bone. Oh, first we're going to talk about the differences between male and female pelvis. Okay. So pelvis is plural for pelvis. So we're going to compare a female pelvis to a male pelvis. Basically, the major differences are that the pelvic bowl, or the true, I guess is considered the true pelvis. It also talks about that a little bit in your textbook, the true pelvis versus the false pelvis. So basically, like this part that you can sort of feel from the outside, including your hip bone and stuff, that's kind of the false pelvis. Whereas the true pelvis is the actual like hollow opening on the inside of the pelvis. So your true pelvis on a female is going to be much wider, obviously to accommodate a human newborn, right? So this is a birth canal. So the uterus and the baby are up here. And the baby has to pass through this hole right here in the pelvis, which is pretty remarkable. In fact, during pregnancy, the pubic symphysis right here, it actually like starts to move, and it actually like sort of dissociates a little bit there in order to make this opening even wider. So pretty crazy. The female pelvis is also tilted forward. Like if you like stick your butt out, that's tilting your pelvis forward. And that is also an adaptation for childbearing. Again, this is a wide opening. The pelvis itself is generally more broad and more shallow from top to bottom. So wider, shorter, broader. The bones are a little bit lighter and thinner and smoother. Whereas in the male pelvis, you instead have a longer or taller pelvis. You've got the bones being thicker and heavier. The true pelvis is not going to be as wide because it does not need to accommodate childbirth. The thicker, heavier bones has to do with accommodating heavier and stronger, relatively speaking, muscles. And it's not as tilted forward as the female pelvis is. So those are the differences between a male and female pelvis. Whoops, whoops. Okay, and here's an actual pelvis seen from an inferior view, female and male. So you can see how much wider that true pelvis is compared to the male's pelvis. And from a lateral view, also the sacrum and the coccyx are sort of shifted back, right? Because you don't need all of this to be in the way of childbirth as well, right? So you need to be like scratching along the coccyx there. Whereas where the male, it's more tucked in. Okay, cool beans. All right, so let's talk about the lower limbs now. So we talked about the pectoral girdle, upper arms, lower arms, and hands. Now we're going to talk about, we just talked about the pelvic girdle, we're going to talk about the upper leg bones, lower leg bones, and feet. The lower limb, all of it, upper and lower leg bones, carries the weight of the body, subject to lots and lots and lots of force. These are larger bones. There are 3 segments of the lower limb: the thigh, which is your femur, the lower leg or the leg bones, of which again you have 2, so like the radius and the ulna, you have the tibia and fibula, and then the foot again has bones of like the ankle, bones of the foot, and then bones of the toes. So let's get going on that. Let's talk about the femur for starters. So your femur, of course, has a big round head on it because it's going to articulate with the acetabulum of your coxal bones. You've got a very distinctive neck on your femur, right? So very nice narrow neck right there between the head and the rest of the bone. You are going to have what are called trochanters. So instead of tubercles, which you have greater and lesser tubercles on your humerus, you have trochanters on the proximal ends of your femurs. Trochanter, I think, is just bigger than a tubercle. A tubercle is slightly larger. A trochanter is just like a big, massive bump. So you have a greater and a lesser trochanter, okay? The greater trochanter is on the lateral side. The lesser trochanter is on the medial side. You've got an intertrochanteric line in between them on the anterior surface, okay? On the posterior surface, you have the intertrochanteric crest. So here is the crest that is linking the lesser and greater trochanters on the posterior side. So the back side of the bone, which you can tell based on the distal end, which we'll talk about in a second. And on the anterior side, the greater and lesser trochanters are joined by the intertrochanteric line. Where's my femur at? The intertrochanteric line versus the intertrochanteric crest on the anterior versus the posterior side. Is that it? I guess that's it. Okay, that's cool. I can dig it. On the diaphysis of your femur, along the shaft of your femur, the only marking that we're asked to know is on the posterior side, on the back side of the femur, is the linea aspera And it looks like I was getting ready to, I did the same thing with this one as I did with the other one. I hope I didn't miss anything. Guess we'll find out. On the back side of the femur, on the posterior side of the femur, you have the linea aspera. Okay, so that's sort of a, it's a line, right? So it's a raised, but not so prominent as a ridge. And you can actually see it really well on both of these. So again, so this is a posterior view, right? So you can see, you can even still see them from here, these lines, okay? So the linea aspera, and then down at the distal end of your femurs, we've got tubercles and condyles. So this tubercle is going to be on the medial side. It's the adductor tubercle because the muscle that goes from up here somewhere to this adductor tubercle closes your legs together, okay? So the adductor tubercle is involved in adducting those limbs, which is a word that we will learn when we talk about muscles and joints and muscle movements. So to adduct is to basically like add to the rest of your body. So like to bring in towards the midline. So the adductor tubercle is where the muscle that is involved in pulling your legs closer to the midline attaches to. We've got a medial and a lateral condyle and a random line. Wow, this one's a mess. I'm sorry, you guys. I don't know what happened. All right, you've got a medial condyle and a lateral condyle, right? So these are big, wide lumps at the distal end of the bone that interact with the lower leg bones to form your knee joint, okay? So linea aspera, adductor tubercle, intercondyle, and intercondylar fossa is going to be the fossa right in between the medial and lateral condyles. Fovea capitis, I did not include. Intertrochanteric, intertrochanteric, spiral line. I also didn't include that one, I don't think, because it was just too hard to see on anything. There was just really no way for me to, oh, I know what I was gonna add. There was no way for me to really like show you the spiral line. So go ahead and cross out spiral line in your lab under the femur, which is page 45. Oops, page 45. Spiral line. And the fovea capitis is over here. That is actually part of the head of the femur. It is a little indentation in the head of the femur. And then the last thing is the popliteal space. And I think that's what I was getting ready to label when I must have been interrupted. I blame my husband. It's all his fault. I'm kidding. The popliteal space. Okay, the popliteal space, the popliteal area of your body is the back of your knee. Okay, so anything considered popliteal is referring to the back of your knee. So the popliteal space here is just this gap right here that makes the back of your knee. Okay, it's basically a place for the tops of your lower leg bones, of your tibia in particular, to fit when you flex your knee, when you bend your knee all the way. Okay, so we got everything except for the spiral line, and I'm okay with that. Any questions about your femur before I move on to your tibia and fibula? Moving on. Okay, so just below the distal end of your femur, you've got your paired lower leg bones. Your patella is your kneecap, And I'm not even worried about you guys. They're not worried about you knowing any parts of it besides one is left and one is right, okay? And I'll always give that to you in context. So I'll always show you a picture of it associated with the rest of the leg and foot so that you know which one is the right patella and which one is the left patella, okay? Your tibia is your shin bone. This is the big bone of your lower leg. The fibula is it's a fine little bone on the lateral side of your tibia in both lower legs, okay? So your tibia is your actual shin bone. So this is your actual shin on this ridge right here on the anterior side. And the fibula, I knew I was gonna do it, is the smaller bone on the lateral side of your tibia. The way to remember which one is which is that your fibula, think of like little white lies, so little fibs. A fib is a lie. So your fibula is littler, like little fibs. So your little fibula, okay? Your fibula is always lateral to your tibia, okay? There's no rotation that happens in your legs. That would be weird and creepy. So let's talk about some markings on these guys. We are reaching the end. I'm excited. We're gonna make it. So up here at your knee joint, right? So up here, remember those condyles, the medial and lateral condyle of the femur? These monstrous things here, right? The medial and lateral condyle, those fit just right into these little cups right here at the top of your tibia. Isn't that nice? And in between those two, like, I guess, facets or fossae, you don't need to know the names of them, so I myself did not learn the names of them. Unless they are, no, there is no, we did not learn the names of those. Do you have them here? No, I guess nobody cares. Nobody cares what those are called. I'm the only one that cares. Whatever. The intercondylar eminence. Okay, so another word for like a protrusion, but like your eminence, right? So it's like up there. The intercondylar eminence is between these two little sockets where the condyles of the femur, the medial and lateral condyles of the femur, fit into. And then below those sockets or facets or whatever are the lateral and medial condyles of the tibia, okay? So here's the medial condyle, right? It's gonna be on the opposite side of the fibula always, because the fibula is always lateral, and the lateral condyle, which is always gonna be on the same side as the fibula, right? Lateral condyle. So like your radius and ulna, they have little places where each other fits in, which is kind of cute and nice, right? So you've got a fibular notch on your tibia where your fibula kind of fits in there. So where that fibula is kind of like going into the bone, that is going to be your fibular notch. There we go. So this is what you're looking at, this right here, except from like a head-on view. Your fibular notch, so that's where the fibula fits in, right there and right there. Okay, your tibial tuberosity. This one is actually really important and very cool. This is the part that you actually kneel on when you kneel onto your knees, right? So you're not actually on your patellas, hopefully, right? That would suck and hurt. what you actually impact on your knees is the tibial tuberosity. So that is a great big bumpy rough spot on the superior anterior portion of your tibia. That is a nice big surface area, big thick surface area. You have nice thick skin there, so that you can crawl around, I guess. The rest of the tibia down here, we've got a malleolus. Okay, so remember on the radius and ulna, we had the styloid processes, which are kind of like wrapping around, pincering around the wrist bones. On the tibia and fibula, you have something similar, except they're called malleolae. So this malleolus, which is part of the tibia, the big bone, is called the medial malleolus. And then the corresponding one on the lateral side is part of the fibula. So the lateral malleolus is part of the fibula, and the medial malleolus is part of the tibia. And together, they sort of wrap around the bones of your ankle, okay? They actually form your like ankle bones, like the bumps of your ankle bones. On either side of your, either side of your ankle, right? And so that's your tibia. We also have we have another popliteal line that I did not, oh I did, it's back here. I'm just wondering why I left this. We don't need to know the malleolar sulcus. But on the back side of the tibia, on the posterior side of the tibia, you have the popliteal line here, okay, which is this sort of like, again, a shallow ridge, aka a line, and which may not even be noted. Oh, of the tibia. Oh, popliteal line. I'm not seeing it. Oh. But it's here. Right there. So that's fine. I probably will have you guys omit that as well, because it's hard to see on a real skeleton. So the popliteal line, don't worry about that. Popliteal is in back of the knee, right? So this is the back of your knee. This is the posterior side of your tibia. So the popliteal line is like at the back of your knee, of your tibia. And all right, moving on to the fibula. So your fibula, again, little fibs, your tiny lower leg bone on the lateral side of both legs. It has a head, and the head has a styloid process. Okay, so the styloid processes of your radius and ulna are on the distal ends, and the styloid process of your fibula is on the proximal end. I'm sorry, it just is. And it's on the head, the proximal head of the fibula. The fibula has a neck, which is a narrower spot below the head, which reaches and meets the rest of the bone, the shaft of the bone. And your lateral malleolus, which I have already mentioned, is the your lateral like ankle bone right here, right? Not your true ankle bone. We're going to talk about those in a second, but the one that actually makes the bump that you consider to be your ankle on the outside. Okay, that's it. All right, so let's move on down to the feet. I've got multiple views here. I like this picture much better than I like the hand picture, so I'll see if I can find something similar for the hand so you can get a view from multiple angles, and hopefully that'll be helpful. So, okay, for your wrist and hand bones, you have carpals and metacarpals, okay? On your feet, your ankle bones are called your tarsals, and your foot bones are called your metatarsals, okay? Carpals, metacarpals, tarsals, metatarsals, okay? Your carpals are what you use to drive your car, and your tarsals are close to your toes. That's how I remembered it, okay? So your carpals are your wrist bones you use to steer your car, and your tarsals are your ankle bones, which are closer to your toes, tarsal toes, carpal car, okay. So we have 7 ankle bones. I do believe we can see them. We can see all of them from a superior view. So these 3 bones right here interacting with the first 3 toes, your big toe being toe number 1, similar to as your thumb is finger number 1. You've got 3 cuneiform bones. These are ankle bones, so these are tarsal bones, okay? Cuneiform as in cube-shaped, okay? 3 cuneiform cube-shaped bones of your ankle, tarsal bones. You have one that is medial, right? Closest to the midline, so it's right beneath your big toe. A intermediate cuneiform bone, and a lateral cuneiform bone, okay? So going from beneath your big toe and over, you have your medial, intermediate, and lateral cuneiform bones. So that's 3 right out the bat. Done, right? You've got your cuboid bone, which is on the lateral side, so it's over here. Cuboid, again, big fat cube-shaped bone. These are short bones, again, right? Your navicular bone is here on the top of your foot, right at the base of your ankle. Okay, so this one is just posterior to your cuneiform bones. And then the last 2 are pretty easy to remember and to tell apart. Your talus bone is the bone that your tibia interacts with your foot with. The hinge that is your how your foot is able to flex and retract, how you're able to move your foot up and down, that hinge joint happens between the talus right there. See how smooth it is? You've got cartilage right there. And this part of your tibia. Okay, so this fits right in to the top of your talus bone on each foot. And your heel bone is called your calcaneus, and it is the largest, very large, big bone. And I want to tell you guys, I know that, I don't think this is something that you may at some point, especially if you study bones further, which I assume that you will not need to be able to identify these individual hand and wrist and foot and ankle bones out of context, okay? So they will always be like in the foot or in the hand so that you can see what they're sitting next to. But if you did, the calcaneus, I think, would be relatively easy to identify by itself. So as far as these ankle bones go, you do not need to know any of the markings on them. You just need to know the bones, okay? So don't worry about the calcaneal tuberosity, the shelf. I guess that's really kind of it, besides what's going on in the talus. The malleolar facet is just interesting because that would be where the malleus fits in, right? The lateral and medial malleolar facets are where those styloid processes fit in. Or sorry, those malleolus. They kind of are like the styloid processes of your lower limb bones. And all right, I think that is those. So those are your ankle bones. So those are your tarsals, right? 3 cuneiform bones, a cuboidal bone, navicular, talus, and calcaneus, okay? And then similarly to your hand, having metacarpals, your feet have metatarsals, which are actually on the inside of your foot, right? So this is most of your foot here. which is made up of 5 metatarsals. And then, like your fingers, you have phalanges, which are your toes. And like your fingers, your big toe, similar to your thumb, only has the 2, as a distal and an, do they call it an intermediate? Or they call it a proximal? Distal and proximal? You don't need to know, so it doesn't matter. Just know that you have 2 on your big toe, and then the rest are 3. So it was the distal, middle, and proximal phalanx for each toe, right? Plural phalanges. Okay, so that is all of the bones, except for one, of your appendicular skeleton. So we already talked about the hyoid bone, but since he has it in the lab over here under random bones at the end of lab 16 on page 46 of your lab manual, your hyoid bone, which is again the bone that's floating here in your throat, not really attached to anything else, it's just sort of floating there on top of your trachea. It's got 2, it's got 2 greater horns or greater cornu. Greater cornua, I guess, is plural. So here's a greater cornu and here's a greater cornu. 2 lesser horns, lesser cornu, lesser cornu. And this is the body of the hyoid bone. So I guess your hyoid bone is technically part of your appendicular skeleton, which seems weird to me, but that's fine. I'm not the expert. And that's it for your appendicular skeleton. I am going to go back and fix stuff in this PowerPoint that it was just sloppy. I apologize for that. We need a new hand diagram. Then I will repost that. I'm going to post this lecture into the module. I'm going to update the assignment to include the pelvis. What else do I need to do? I'm gonna find us a video for the mnemonic device for the wrist bones, so that hopefully we can like get a better feel for that, or maybe like a colored image or something to help us with that. What else do you guys need from me? What do you need me to do now? Anything?
I have a question. So today was basically lab 14 and 15, right?
And 16.
And 16. What about the rest? Are we doing that Thursday and turning that in after, or at night?
So we've got for the rest of the oh yeah, so I see what you're saying. Everything that's in between 16 and 17? Is that what? Yeah, between this and the dissection. Okay, so on page 47, which is right after the end of 16, on the next page, there's questions. These are going to be really great practice for you guys. I highly recommend trying to answer all of these, but I'm not going to have you turn it in. I'm just going to do the coloring book for actual turning in purposes. Mm-hmm. But definitely answer these questions. They might be tougher to do if you don't have like a partner to do them with. Some of them say you need a partner. You can, do them on yourself or find a family member that'll be willing to play. So I would say definitely do those, but I'm not going to ask you to photograph them or turn them in.
Okay, so for lab 17, 18, and 19, where in the coloring book do you want us to turn?
So for the dissecting labs, we're gonna need to identify the muscles, but we also need to be able to we also need to know what the action of each muscle is. So we've got these charts that Dr. Sternberg made that tell the name of the muscle and the action, and then have a blank space for the origin and insertion. And I am not going to ask you to memorize the origins and insertions of each muscle. We learned the markings on the bones that they go into, and at some point you will need to come back to it. In terms of your like nursing career, you will come back to that, especially if you're doing like physical therapy or something like that. Then you're gonna have to probably come back to this. So take a look at it if you think you're going to be needing that, but I'm not going to actually be testing you on the origins and insertions. I basically want you guys to be able to identify the muscle and then know its action, know what it does. Does it flex the arm? Does it extend the arm? Does it abduct the arm? Does it adduct the arm?
Mm-hmm.
These things we are going to learn on Thursday when I talk about joints.
Okay.
All of the different muscle actions when I talk about joints. The other part is going to be the dissection.
Uh-huh.
And the way that we're going to do that is using our friend over here. I'm going to be using our lecture time to basically be dissecting this guy down and pointing out all of the different muscles that you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
So this dude is going to be our dissection, basically.
So 17.
So yeah, so that is lab 17. That's the whole superficial muscles of the cat, and then deep muscles of the cat, right? So 17 is the superficial muscles of the cat. Lab 18 is deep muscles of the cat. So we're gonna basically be going through this guy instead of a cat, which I guess is cool because it's a human, but also not cool because you don't get to dissect anything yourself. And so I'll basically just like be doing that for you, like on video, you know, like we'll record it and then you can go back and watch that. And then
Because it's
yeah, go for it. What?
it says that we have to turn in lab 11, what is it, through 19 on the 23rd.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That's why you guys are freaking out. I'm like, why is everybody freaking out about these labs? I'll change that. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, because you're having, so that's why I was kind of concerned.
It's only be labs 11 through 16 that are due on the 23rd. 17 and 18 won't be due until we're done with muscles, which isn't until the 14th of May.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's what was stressing me out because I was like, none of this makes sense until to turn it in for Thursday.
I'm so sorry. I didn't have to looking at it. So when I first made the Canvas module, I was just like going by just trying to put them in order, and I would clean them up as we got closer, and then we ended up doing this whole online thing. So now it's like because normally if we were meeting, you wouldn't be turning in the assignments to me online. You know, you would have, remember we were just showing them to me at the end of class and I was marking off your name. So the dates didn't matter then, but they matter now. So now I have to super get ahead and change all of those dates. So I'm so sorry about that. No, 11 through 16, we're just doing the skeleton labs are due on Thursday.
Okay, perfect. And then just to verify, if you could, did you send us an email in regards to which, from lab 11, what page is it in the coloring book? Did you do that already? I need to go back to that.
I did. I can reiterate in my next email if you want me to.
Yeah, just to make sure I'm in the right, because I've done most of it, I think, in coloring book, but I just want to make sure.
So we're doing most, if not all, of the skeleton stuff in the coloring book. I think I have every page accounted for skeleton stuff. All of this this tendons and ligament joint stuff that happens on pages 42, 43, 44, and 45, right in the middle of all of our skeleton stuff. That stuff, we're not learning the names of the ligaments. So I have omitted it. We're not doing all of this ligament stuff. Even though the carpal bones are in there, I'm gonna find a separate one because we've got all of these tendons and ligaments in there, confusing stuff in the coloring book. So instead of using the coloring book for that, I'm going to find something else. But I'm not gonna have you turn it in. I'll just have something for an exercise for you.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. it's an almost perfect solution. Put it that way. This coloring book is an almost perfect solution. But we're going to talk about joints on Thursday, and I might assign a couple of these pages, like the knee on page 48 of the coloring book. We have, and the elbow. This is pretty cool too. The elbow on pages 42 and 43 of the coloring book. Those would be good to do for the joints. But on Thursday, we'll talk about different joint types, a couple of very specific joints like the knee and the elbow, and a couple of the other ones, and the actions of the muscles, and like, because that kind of goes with like how the joints move. Yeah, and then on that day, just the skeleton labs are due.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it's just.
I was stressing out. It's like, wait.
I thought you guys were like getting way ahead. I thought you guys were just like bored out of your minds and like way ahead. I was like, why are they so bored and trying to get ahead?
No, because I thought we had to turn everything by Thursday. So I was like, Wednesday, I'm just gonna like everything.
Nope. We're gonna talk about muscles and then I'm gonna make it do. So let me update that too. So I've got a bunch of stuff to get on right now. I can come back in an hour. I'll come back in an hour at 5:30. Like, look over your stuff. I'm gonna upload all this stuff and try and get as much of it done. Fix all my little problems as I can, and then I'll come back at 5:30. I'll have to send you a password. God dang it. The password for it, apparently. But I will.
So what are we doing at 5:30?
Just question and answer. Just
okay, yeah, cool. Because I have a lot for the skill, like, because I wanted to see if you have time, like, today, kind of review with, like, I mean, I'm gonna ask questions because that whole spring break, I literally like watch your lectures. Literally, I would not pass a slide until I knew what you were talking about. And obviously, just because I'm gonna need to know anyway, so I really like spring break is like me catching up.
Yeah.
But there's just so much, so I want to kind of review with you at 5:30 if you can, just to kind of see where I'm at.
We're gonna still have, I believe we still have time for a review. There's still gonna be a review. Yeah, on Tuesday, on the 28th. It's supposed to be the rest of chapter 9, joints. We'll have that be a bone review. The test is that Thursday, April.
Okay.
Oh, and I need to get the study guide.
So from here on out, our lecture, like the times, are those just like office hours?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna use them. I'm gonna use as much of them as I need to lecture and to go over the lab and stuff. And then I'll just use the lecture time for, like a Q&A office hours thing.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That works for me.
Excellent. Good deal. I'll record them too, especially if they're going to be, if they're big ones like this one. I expect is probably going to be a good one.
And
Okay,
all
so-
we turn in from now on is just coloring pages?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what we're turning in. Coloring
Okay.
pages and online quizzes and exams.
Okay.
Thank you, Jessica, for this coloring book, because it did make it a lot easier doing this coloring book, because wow.
It's the next best thing to hands-on. It's like, at least you have something to like focus on. And the eye and ear is really cool too. So we're going to use those as well when we get there.
For our test, so it's going to be, our test will be from chapters.
It'll be 6 through 9.
Damn, okay.
Was the bone, microscopic bone kind of stuff. 7 and 8 are axial and appendicular skeleton. And then 9 will be joints.
Joints, okay.
Yep. So skeleton and joints for this upcoming exam 3 on the 30th.
Woo. Okay.
On the weekend of the 30th, right? So we're still going to have it be like open Thursday through Sunday.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Be the same format, same types of questions in the lecture, same types of questions in the lab.
Okay.
All of that as similar as possible.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. So I will be back at 5:30 to answer your questions and fix a bunch of stuff until then. Okay?
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, guys.